What is the truth in the stories we are told? We've been given a story of a world fueled by separation. We've become separate from one another, separate from the earth, ultimately separate from the true nature of ourselves. It's time we learn the truth. It's time you rewrite your story. It's time to realign with who it is that you really are. This is the fifth dimension.
You are infinite and eternal. We are infinite and eternal.
Our natural essence, we could say, is simply being.
We have this awakening coming together as a perfect storm.
We're ready for this. We have the capacity inside. We just got to find that.
All right, we're on the air. Everybody, welcome in the Fifth Dimension podcast. Joe Hawley, thanks for joining the podcast, brother. How are you?
Yeah, Evan, thanks, brother. How you doing?
Doing good. As I said before we hopped on, it's a beautiful Monday morning. I can't
It
complain.
sure is. Yeah, and I'm sorry if you guys can hear a baby crying in the background. That's my my newborn, like 3 weeks old.
I was gonna say.
I apologize for that.
No, congratulations on the
Thank you.
newborn son. I think I saw the picture on Instagram.
Luca.
Is first kid?
Yeah, first kid. Yeah, it's a quarantine love story. I mean, I met my wife. We had known each other. We were part of the same mastermind for like a year in 2019, but then we really connected at a retreat like 2 weeks before quarantine happened and the world shut down.
Yeah.
And we ended up quarantining together. And over a year later, now we have a baby and we're married. So
Beautiful.
it's pretty wild.
Beautiful. You know, it's funny because the concept of fatherhood is something that's come up. Like I've heard a lot of different people talking about it, right? And you know, I don't have any kids myself, but I heard a good quote, and it was, "You can never truly grow up until you have kids." And would you say, I mean, it's only been a couple weeks, have you noticed any sort of individual transformations taking place?
Yeah, man, it's been quite the process. There's a lot to process through, actually, but you know, just like, you know, it really shifts your entire life in an instant. And, you know, it's crazy that the universe gives you kind of 9 months to prepare for it, but nothing can really prepare you for the moment. And, you know, there's a wide range of emotions that come with it. But as far as being a father, like that's one of the things I'm really stoked about is the continued lessons that it's going to provide. It's going to provide an opportunity for growth that I don't think I'll be able to get anywhere else. And as somebody who like really loves experiencing life to the fullest and going after different experiences, I think fatherhood is kind of like that final frontier of growth opportunity. And I know it's going to challenge me in a lot of ways, but it's going to force me to grow and be more present and love more deeply. So I'm really, really stoked about it.
Awesome. No, that's beautiful. And I think it's, you know, I'd look at fatherhood down the line, something I definitely am called to. And I feel like that's the truest, like, test of who you are in a lot of ways. Like you get to have this, in theory, perfect relationship from the beginning with this kid and bring them up and show them, I don't know, the ways of the world. So
yeah
lots to look forward to.
Yeah, it's really cool. Like, you know, I've been on my own deep healing journey, and that part of that journey has been reconnecting with my parents. And, you know, me and my father were never really close growing up. He wasn't a bad dude. It wasn't like, you know, like all these stories you hear about bad fathers. Like he's a really good man, but he's just really simple, wasn't very present. You know, he was out working a lot and he sacrificed a lot for our family to live in like an upper middle class place. And I just always desired that deep connection, that father-son connection I never really got. And it's been really beautiful over the last year and a half. We've reconnected and we have that love again, but it's still not like as open and transparent and life filled as I'd like. And it's really cool. That thing I've always desired, now that I have a son, it's an opportunity to create that father-son relationship that I've always desired from the other angle. And it's funny, when I was in high school, I remember having this thought. I wanted to, because my dad never really shared a lot of life experience with me. I just didn't think he had a lot. And so I told myself, if I have a son, when I have a son, I'm going to experience as much life as I can so that I actually have life experiences to share with him, real world experience, real world lessons, stuff that I can really speak from experience with him and share with him. And, you know, over the last 12 years since I had that thought. I've lived a lot of life, and I'm really stoked about the journey ahead and being able to share that with them.
Right, definitely. And it's beautiful to see you have this conscious awareness instead of, a lot of times we hear about people repeating family traumas or generational patterns, through the years. So you have that conscious awareness to say, I didn't receive this and it would have benefited me in a lot of different ways. So I'm going to pass that down to the next generation, to my own children. And I think that's
Yeah.
a beautiful thing to see. And
Yeah, it's part of the journey we're all on. Really, healing is collective trauma. I mean, we hear a lot about this healing journey that everybody goes on, and there's so many different layers to that, right? It's like my own personal healing journey from my experiences as I grew up. Then there's the ancestral trauma, like you talked about, that is passed down. Then there's this collective energy that is, in our society, in our culture, and then there's like that biological stuff that gets passed down. So there's just so many layers to it, and I truly believe that, in order to heal the world, we first must heal ourselves. And what I've noticed with my, doing this healing work, it's not only going to heal and kind of stop that trauma getting passed down to my kids and their kids, but it also, this funny thing with time, I don't think it's so linear as we think, because I think the healing we're doing now actually goes back in time and heals. Because, doing this work, I've actually healed with my parents, and I see them lightening up, and they're starting to wake up, and their awareness is growing just through my presence and love. There's nothing I'm telling them. And so it is this crazy opportunity to really change the world through our own self-awareness.
so when was it that you really started to engage on this conscious healing path? I mean, you spent 8 years in the NFL, you did van life afterwards. I mean, when was it that you sort of gained this awareness to a power beyond the self and really started looking at all of this, and some of the concepts we even already talked about from this larger picture?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always had this deep understanding that there is a creator, there is something out there that it created this experience. And I grew up in a Christian household and never really understood, or always had questions around that belief structure around what God was. And it really kind of turned me away, turned me off, developed a lot of internal shame and guilt around who I was. And I just never really resonated with it. And I always had these questions, but I always had this deep desire to know the truth for myself through my own experience. And it wasn't until about, I started meditating, which, in the Christian faith, my dad was telling me I was told it's kind of like Eastern mysticism. It's the way the devil gets into your mind. And it's fascinating how the church can create these narratives to keep us from actually looking into ourselves. But it was I think my 4th or 5th year in the NFL, and these mindset coaches came, and they started talking about meditation as a mental training and being able to, help your performance on the field, help decrease your anxiety, your stress, like all these things. And I was really like, football in the NFL is really challenging in a lot of different ways. And one of the things is the performance anxiety, like always having to perform at the highest level. And when you don't, it's really hard. And so, I started developing a meditation practice back then, which was really challenging to do. As anybody knows that first starts meditating, the mind is a crazy beast, and the mind races. But I stuck with it. And then I started, another thing that really helped me on the journey was when I started reading, really dove into some books. First book I read was The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari by Robin Sharma. And it's just a really easy read, but it really talks about all these different like spiritual concepts. And it's a really beautiful story about a guy who's a trial lawyer who ends up having a heart attack, and he has to end up giving away everything he owns to go find himself in the Himalayan mountains. And it's fascinating looking back on my journey. It's kind of similar to what I did when I ended up leaving the NFL. I ended up giving all my stuff away to charity, bought a van, and I traveled the country to go find myself. And so it's been a journey. It really started with the meditation and the reading and opening my mind and learning about myself. But it wasn't really until I decided, through that big transition, which I think we all go through big transitions in our lives. And my 8th year in the league, it was finally, there was a little whisper within me telling me it was time to walk away. And that was a really tough decision on a lot of different levels. Felt very unsupported. I think a lot of people that knew me, my parents, I was engaged at the time, my fiance, she didn't really support me in that decision, because I think everybody else's identities were lost in that as well. And so that it was really hard to kind of break away from that. And that's part of the reason I decided to buy a van and travel the country, because I wanted to really know who I was without this story that I've created of who I thought I needed to be in order to receive love and validation and what success looks like and all this programming that society puts on us. And so when I was on the road, that was really when I started deepening and doing this deep healing work. I started getting into some of the plant medicine ceremonies and, doing it. I did ayahuasca a few times down in a healing center in Costa Rica, and just learning more about, myself and the stories, and, that every story we have is just, we're projecting out onto the world, right? And when we can figure out why we interact with the world in a certain way, we can start shifting those internal stories. It really changes everything. And, so the reading really helped, deepening the spiritual practices. And then obviously the psychedelics really helped open my mind in a profound way and help me release. They say like ayahuasca is doing 10 years of therapy in one night. And I definitely resonate with that, because it really helps you process stuff that you're not even aware of. We hold a lot of trauma in our physical bodies as well. And there's just a lot of release through those kind of experiences. And yeah, man. So it's been a constant unfolding over the last couple of years. And I think, if we're alive, the journey never really ends, and it just continues to go on. And I think that's what real infinity is, right? It's just a constant unfolding into the present moment.
Right. No, definitely. There is I think when you first start getting into like spirituality, like myself speaking, I looked at it as like, there's a destination, there's a place I want to reach to. But when you get to a certain point, it's like, okay, it's just the continuous like self-awareness, the continuous growth and the continual learning that, there's new things that I uncover about myself when I'm doing this work. Every time, like every day, if I go in meditation, I'll pick up a new awareness. Like, oh, I was holding this judgment, or oh, I acted out of anger in this instance. How do I sort of combat that in the future? So it's the idea of like enlightenment, like of being a place, a destination, I think kind of keeps us from acknowledging what we are now in the present. And
it's kind of overwhelming to think about that the experience never ends.
Yeah.
Like it's always gonna and it's kind of a twofold thing, right? The paradox that we live in. The experience never really ends. We always exist. We're never not here. And that's an overwhelming thing to think about, but it's also a beautiful thing when you look at others, because it means there's no rush. And every single path, no matter if it's a quote unquote spiritual path, or if you want to go make money, or you want to be successful, or you want to get a lot of nice things, or you want to travel and have new experiences, every single path that you go on leads you away from the present moment, and it goes on for infinity. And until you can really understand that, if you're chasing something down a path, you're gonna get to a point where I think a lot of people get to, and sadly it's too far along the line when they reach retirement, maybe 65, 70 years old, and they're like, wait, what was I going towards? What was I working for? This is it? And so every path leads away from now. And so the key is to understand that the only thing that really exists is this present moment. And so if we can come back to the moment constantly over and over again, because the mind is constantly taking us out of it. But that's why these practices are so important. And that's why they're called practices. They're not, you don't just figure it out. You have to constantly train yourself to come back into the present moment. And when you do that, something magical happens. There's something within you that is calling you and pulling you towards the experience that you want to have. And when you can find stillness and be quiet, you can communicate with that part of yourself that is pulling you or pushing you or guiding you towards whatever it is you want to experience. And if you can learn to trust that, that's when the real magic starts to happen.
Right. Let the heart lead, let the mind follow. The mind is always going to tell us a reason not to take that risk or take a leap of faith, or, not go on that travel experience. Like you were saying, it was a difficult decision to walk away from the NFL. I mean, I'm sure like a part of you was ultimately like your whole identity was sort of based around being an NFL player. I mean, that's that's elite athlete, top of the world in terms of football. So, there's almost like a trust in just following what the heart is saying, even if there's a complete unknown in front of you, and then that's along what the lines you're doing with the Härt Collective, right? Where, I'm sure when you retire from professional sports, that's one of the only careers. I mean, unless you're Tom Brady, where you're going to be done by your 30s, 40 at the latest. So it's like, and for a lot of people, that's middle of life. That's where they're in the middle of their careers. They're, like you mentioned, people don't get done till 65, 70. And then they have that moment of like, what is it that I'm actually like doing? What is it what is sort of the deeper meaning of this life? And I feel like what you're providing in a sense is that wake up call of like, this is sort of this beginning point for the next great part of like discovering yourself, if you will. I mean, is that a good way to define it?
Yeah, I mean, it's there's a lot of unique challenges that come with leaving professional sports, and I definitely, there's a common misconception of people that say, "Oh, I wish I played in the NFL so I could go do what you did." But it wasn't an easy decision for me to do that, for me to make the decision to give everything away and hit the road. It was me having the courage to go into the unknown, which I think everybody has an opportunity when they're called to do that. It doesn't matter what your experience is or what your where you're at in life. There's something calling you to the unknown. It takes courage to go do that. And there's a reason that, there's not a lot of NFL guys that went and did that. And I'm grateful that I did, because looking back on it now, I know that it had a profound impact on my life. But when I was first going out and constantly going into the unknown and living in this van, there was a lot of fear in that, a lot of unknown, and continuing to take that step. And when I was on that journey, realizing, I played for 8 years, and there was a part of me that was really excited about being done. And, the difficulties and challenges that come with playing in the NFL, like I lost my starting job 5 times. I felt like I had to constantly prove myself. And there was a part of me that was just done with it. And I was really excited about the next chapter of life, the next adventure, the next, thing that I could learn to do and find success in. And I was surprised that when I finally walked away, even though I was walking away on my own terms, how challenging it actually was. And that's not the case with a lot of athletes. A lot of athletes, their careers are over before they want them to be, sadly. And most people, most players are not the Tom Bradys or the Aaron Rodgers or the Peyton Mannings. 90% of the guys are grinding every single day to make it. And then at some point it's over. And usually it's over before they even realize it, or they want it to be over. And so there's a lot of unique challenges. And when I went through my transition, I realized like, dang, this is really hard. And I had the courage to go out, buy the van, travel the country. And while I did that, I joined a couple different communities. I met a lot of amazing people, and realized that this is part of the journey, is being surrounded by like-minded people that can support you in the healing that you're doing and finding yourself on a deeper level. And that had a profound impact on my life. And I realized, if I could create this is the one thing that's missing from the transition out of sports. Because when you play, especially football, I mean, I was a part of a team for 16 years. I had a common goal that I was focused on, being my best on the field, winning football games. And I shared that vision with other people. I received coaching, structure, routine, all this stuff. And then as soon as it's over, all of that is gone. And you're just you're there by yourself. There is no community. There is no support. And, the NFL provides resources, but a lot of them are just very superficial. It's like secondary education. They think that in order to solve this kind of issue, it's about what you're doing. You need to find something else to do. And what I'm creating with the Härt Collective is you got to learn how to be who you are, and answer the question, like, who am I without this story? And I think it's really beautiful that, athletes, anybody that goes through a big transition, but going from such a pinnacle experience where your identity is so wrapped up in it and it's all of a sudden over, I think it's a really beautiful opportunity to reshape that story, because it is a form of ego death. There is a huge part of the story, and all the ego is the construct of who you think you are in relation to the world, how you show up. It's your identity. And so when the piece of that has to die, there has to be a grieving process of letting that go. But then there's this beautiful, vulnerable place where we can shape and mold that story. And I think that's why I'm so excited about the Härt Collective, kind of building this community for this niche guys, because, athletes are really special individuals. They know, better than most, mindset, mental toughness, discipline, all of these things. And I think a lot of the foundational tools that I developed and all the lessons and adversities and challenges I've gone through football really set the foundation for this journey that I'm on now. And my own spiritual growth, my own self-development has been exponential because of the mindset that I do have and the ability to really just focus and have the discipline to show up each day. And so I'm really excited about building this community for these guys, because if I can get them to really turn the lens of awareness inward and find out who they are on a deeper level, they can really show up and have a big impact in the world. Because, the world is in a crazy place right now. And this is the kind of work that needs to happen. And, athletes are the role models and leaders of our society and our culture. And it's kind of this top-down approach where if we can get them to start doing the deeper healing work, finding out who they are, then they can actually share that with the world. And I think it really has an opportunity to, send positive ripples out into the world of what we're doing.
Right. No, definitely. And, you have athletes, they have a larger platform than most, just being in a professional sports league where you have people who, there's people who worship the teams and, kids look up to, I said Tom Brady because I was a Patriots fan growing up. I looked up to him as a role model. I mean, and so there's a certain level of if they're engaging in that healing process, then that's going to inspire others. So I think that's truly a beautiful thing that you are doing. And I'm excited to see how that continually evolves. Cause I used to follow, you hear the stories all the time about athletes who they can't let go of the sport, or they end up in dire straits after they retire because there isn't any sort of foundation, if you will. And I love what you said about being as opposed to doing. I think maybe the big problem, you mentioned the world being hectic. One of the largest problems is that we are so focused on what do I need to do? What do I need to ultimately become? Or, we place our identities in our career, or, an ideology we attach our identities around, instead of just embracing the fact that we're alive, our beingness, that should be sort of the foundation of who we are. We don't need to feel self-doubt in our being. We are worthy, we are abundant, as our birthright. And I think that really gets lost in terms of our story. Something I saw the other day, it's can you answer the question, who are you, without saying your job or your career or any of the sort of
even your name.
Yeah, even your name.
Your name's given to you before you're even born. You didn't even get to choose your name.
Right.
How much of a trip is that?
Right. Who are you without the external circumstances? And I would say, pretty confidently that most people probably wouldn't have much of an answer to that. But I don't think that's a bad thing. I think the exploration of that question is it could be a first step, if you will.
Yeah. And what you said, it's so important. This journey is a constant letting go. And that's why I love the Buddhist philosophy of non-attachment, because we get so attached to our stories, our ideologies, our belief systems, our religions. We want certainty so much that we hang on to things to figure out what this reality is. And that's a big issue with the world today, is when we get so attached to something, it doesn't leave space for us to sit in the awe and the not knowing. That's where the beauty really lives. But you have to go on the journey of discovery in order to figure out that you don't know anything. And I think the wisest people that I know in this plane of existence are the people that say, I don't know. I don't know. I've gone on the path and I've realized that there's infinite potential always, and I don't know. And it all is, and none of it is, all at the same time, the paradox that we live in. And going on that path, I've gone on that path myself, and it brings you back into the present moment, and it just allows you to sit in the awe of the experience rather than trying to figure it out and have an answer, because there is no real answer. The answer is the meaning that you give it. And so what story do you want to create? Why not create a positive one that's more loving and more enjoyable? And I think that's why gratitude is such a powerful tool, because, for me, if you know me personally, I multiple times a day, I always say, what a time to be alive. And anytime I'm reminded of, an incredible thing that we get to experience as humans in this day and age, I just say, what a time to be alive. And that's my daily gratitude practice. I press a button on my screen on my phone and get something delivered the next day to my house. It's what a time to be alive. And it just brings me back into a state of gratitude rather than focusing on what I don't have and what I want to accomplish and all these things that are lacking in my life. Gratitude allows you to sit in the gift that you are given. And even if that's just being grateful for taking a breath, for being alive. And it's just such a beautiful tool that I think, is really the secret sauce to the entire universe.
No, I would definitely agree. I mean, you can find anybody at any time can find at least one thing to be grateful for, even if it is as simple as the breath. I mean, we take advantage or take for granted the breath because it's most of the time unconsciously going in the background. But if you don't breathe for 3 or 4 minutes, like you're dead. Like that's just the nature of life. So
and the cool thing about the breath is it's the bridge, right? It's the only thing that we do unconsciously. Like we breathe to stay alive. There's nothing we have to do. And then all of a sudden, when we bring our awareness to it, all of a sudden we can control it. Like we are the one breathing. But how many people actually take conscious breaths? Like I'll notice myself, unless I'm sitting down meditating, like I try to just, oh, wow, I just want to take a deep breath and be conscious of it. But so many people go their entire day without actually taking one single conscious breath. And I think the more times you can really bring your awareness into your breathing, that's why breath work is so powerful. That's why when meditation, people focus on the breath because it's an anchor point and a bridge between the conscious and the unconscious. And like Carl Jung says, until you make the unconscious conscious, you will be a slave to it and call it fate.
Yeah.
Think about that for a sec.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And I found that introducing breath work practices, I think the first one I ever was introduced to was the Wim Hof Method, which, a lot of people are picking up that one. That's where I noticed a large shift outside of the meditation practice, outside of the breath work. Like I found myself being more present and aware throughout the day, just on my mood or on my surroundings or how I'm interacting with people and how I'm going to choose to respond. Like just taking time to anchor into your breath, it puts you into a space where you're not letting the mind run its stories and not letting it letting the unconscious beliefs that we hold about ourselves and that we're imposing upon the world almost narrow our bandwidth of sight, you could say. Like it puts a veil over us when we're letting the unconscious live because we're not seeing the world as it is. We're imposing our will, we're imposing our perspective and trying to shape it around our beliefs. And, when that's ultimately, I would say when there's contrast in that, when it's challenged, that's when we would get upset or triggered and things like that. And it's, I think, when we're looking at, I hear you talk about on your podcast, this is something I mentioned as well, is this idea of like a paradigm shift and a collective paradigm shift. Something I've been really thinking about is like, how do we actually initiate this? And obviously you mentioned earlier, you can't change the world. You have to change yourself, right? So I think the paradigm shift is almost it's going to be individual transformations taking place to bring about a collective shift, collective healing. And what an opportunity that is, because this is I feel like we're in a time where we've never had a better opportunity to create that sort of reality or bring that out. And it feels inevitable to me that that's something we're going to create. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but
yeah. I think it's a beautiful time. I think it's easy to look out in the world and be pessimistic, like, oh, the world's going to hell. There's so much fear. Like there's so much shit going on. But in my life, I'm so optimistic because I see people waking up all over the place. And waking up doesn't have to be going down this deep spiritual path and going to the jungle to drink ayahuasca and all of a sudden becoming this little guru that sits on his mat all the time. Like waking up is having a self-awareness. Like if I go and have a donut for breakfast and it doesn't make me feel good, and I'm like, whoa, this donut didn't make me feel good. Like that's waking up to having an awareness of how you are in control of how your body works and what you want to create, and start to understand the stories of we are the creators in creation, creating the experience. And, I just read Charles Eisenstein's book, The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible. And it's a really beautiful, he talks a lot about this big transition we're going through, and it's the worldview, the world story that we have of separation, and we're moving into this world and story of oneness and unity. And in that transition, there's definitely going to be some chaos, right? And that's kind of what we're seeing. But it's I truly believe that it's going to happen faster than we think. And he talks about in that book, like before the Berlin Wall came down, if you went around and asked people in the society, like, do you think this will happen? They probably would have said like decades from now, if ever, like it's not going to happen. We're oppressed, like all this stuff. And all of a sudden the Berlin Wall came down because there was enough people in the society that started questioning the stories. And that's all it takes is a bunch of people to start doing this type of work, which I see all over the place. And then all of a sudden it gets to a certain kind of tipping point, and then all of a sudden it just shifts. And I think that's where we're at. And it's, there's a lot of unknown ahead. I think with the way technology is advancing as well, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff to come in our lifetime, but it's just, buckle up and enjoy the ride.
No, definitely. I agree with that wholeheartedly. And I'll definitely have to read that book because it sounds like it really resonates with what I've almost been feeling on an intuitive level, right? Before all periods of great transformation, you're going to have the chaos of the old system collapsing down, the old paradigm. Like it sort of has a life of its own. Like it has a story that unconsciously runs through so many people. So it's going to naturally create chaos, create resistance to something that is new. But I think more and more people I've been connecting with, they're realizing that the old stories, they just don't work. They don't resonate. Like there's something that's missing. I think that in our society in particular, we've really lacked in the emphasis, there hasn't been a connection to a higher power, a connection to the highest ideal of who we could be as humans, right? Like, how often do we ask ourselves in this old way of being, who could I be? Like, what am I aiming towards? And we've talked about that earlier in the podcast, but I think the void is going to be filled, just by simply embracing our being and having a highest ideal of who we're supposed to be and living as one as opposed to separate, because we are so separate right now through labels, through ideologies. And I think that's a choice people make. And I think more people are choosing the side of light and love.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fascinating that we were born into this system, and so many people think, because they're born into the world, they look out in the world and they're like, this is the way it is. But they don't realize that this world was created by the people that came before us. And I love the Steve Jobs quote: "Until you realize that the world was created by people that are no smarter than you are, then you just won't wake up." Because it, like, all of the systems that we were created were, first of all, like, it blows my mind that we can't think of the government system that was created almost 300 years ago. It's not built for the time we live in with our technology and the way our society's evolved. And like, people are so attached, like that's the way it has to be. It's like, well, they when that system was created, they let go of the old system to create their new one. Like, why can't we get to a point where we can let go of that and create something that's better? And with the education system as well, I think the education system is so broken. And I think it's fascinating that majority of adults nowadays have gone through the education systems and they're still putting their kids into the education system. I think it's like the standardized testing model of what intelligence is like memorization and learning. Like, I just don't see it. And having a kid now, like, I'm really looking at that from a completely different perspective. And I think this last year has really woken me up and woken a lot of people up to the way the systems have been created. And, even the idea of like having to go to a 9-to-5 job and show up at an office. Like, my wife's creating this job platform for fully remote positions. And we've learned pretty much overnight that we don't have to go in and work. We can work from home. We can create a life that we want. We can work when we want. But it's so hard for companies and cultures to like evolve in that way. So I think there's a lot of beautiful things happening in this transition. And I think there's enough people that are solving and working on the big issues that we're facing as a humanity that I'm totally optimistic that we're going to figure it out.
Right. No, I definitely agree. And, I come from a teaching background. I've worked in the public schools, and I say the same thing. It's like, as a teacher, I recommend right now, I don't know if I would send your kids to school. I would homeschool if you have this sort of awareness, like we're talking about, right? I mean, for some people, obviously it's not a realistic option, but my personal mission, like down the line is, I have the entrepreneurial mindset of like, how can I evolve like a new educational paradigm, right? Like, how can we instill in kids self-development and higher purpose and just being, taking, and certainly there's things in academics that we should learn. Like we want to know how to read and be literate, and math is important, and science has its place, and history has its place, and all of these subjects. I think it's not like we just completely scrap everything. Like, we take what we can from the old systems, whether it be education, whether it be government, and there's things that served us when they were created, and how do we evolve them to better serve us now. And I think there's so many people across all of the different spectrums of modalities that exist in the world, that enough people are tackling it and will be able to create sort of that global shift. And in my lifetime, I have no doubt, and I would say in your lifetime, you're not that much older than me, like we're going to see this shift happen. And by the time we're old and wise and gray, and we'll look back
We
and be
want
like,
with technology so we won't ever die.
oh, that's we'll have the immortality. That's
don't know.
hey, that they're talking about that. I mean, I think actually they're already predicting that the oldest, the first person who's going to live to 150 is already alive, because we're
no
already
doubt.
we're already creating the technologies. But
Yeah, I think with the education system, it's like the two things I've found as an adult that every adult needs to interact with the world that we've created is emotional intelligence and financial literacy, both of which they don't teach in school.
Yep.
Which I find absolutely fascinating. And even the people that are teaching school, like, they're doing it from the lens of not actually being financially literate or emotionally intelligent. And so it's this self-perpetuating cycle. And then doing this work, realizing how important that stuff is to interact with the world that we've created. And it's like, we do have to adjust. We do have to start at least teaching these things in schools to give these kids an opportunity to really grow. And that's where it all starts, like educating our youth and then having them evolve into better humans than we are. I mean, that's really what evolution is in the path that we're on. And we get so attached. We need to be able to adjust.
Right. No, definitely. And I think it's, you talked about fatherhood, like you want your kid to be a more self-actualized version than you were. Like you want that continual growth, that continual evolution. And, somebody's life work could be condensed, like 20, 30 years worth of work could be condensed into one book. And it's like, this is my creation. Someone could read that book in 5 hours and then have all the knowledge that it took that one person 20 or 30 years to accumulate. They just gained it in 5 hours. So it's, there's this continual process of higher learning and higher growth and higher evolution. And, I think one of the things that I've noticed is we tend to believe we've already reached a pinnacle, if you will, or like individually we can't contribute. Like that's the story that's sort of been told to us. Maybe we can't contribute to the creating or evolving, and there's almost like a stagnation that occurs. But I think the new way of being is going to be it's going to be growth. It's going to be evolution. From my own teaching background, I've had to learn emotional intelligence. I'm learning financial literacy now, and it's like, all right, those are tools that I want to pass down, like so everybody has that, because I think the way of the entrepreneur mindset is going to be the future. Because it's good. You can, I don't mind working under someone per se, but if I'm just going and slaving away at a 9-to-5 job, am I truly optimizing my gifts and my talents if it doesn't sort of fit what my heart is telling me? And I think a lot of people are living against the callings of the heart.
Yeah, I mean, it's the old story that we're lost in, right? And it's the value incentive, I think, needs to change as well. Like we're working for money, and we need money to survive. And I don't know what that evolves into, but this idea that we live in an abundant world, abundant universe. We've created technology where abundance is literally like I can press anything on my phone and it comes to my door. Like, we've created these comforts for ourselves that I don't think there's any reason that we can't, there shouldn't be like a minimum standard of living. But I think when I say something like that, people are like, oh, you're a socialist, and they get attached to these stories. I'm like, no, there should be opportunity for people that want to excel and grow and achieve more and higher levels of success. But there should be this minimum standard of living for everybody. And like, why can't it be both? And I think, we get to a place where the world, like, the real gift is creative and critical thinking, like thinking, period. But most people don't actually think. They're just programmed to go through their lives and what they've been told. And until we can really, because we've gotten to a point where technology should be able to very soon take all of the tasks that just take up time off of our plates. Yeah. And so what does that leave? That leaves us an opportunity just to be, just to think, to be creative, to create from a place of love and just pure energy of what wants to come through us. And that's a beautiful place to be. And what we've created as humans, we've gotten to a place where we can accomplish this now as a world. And it's just going to take a lot of stepping into that, and a lot of transition, a lot of change. I think there's a lot of fear in change because it's going into the unknown. Like, it's if you don't know what to expect, then it brings up fear in people. But you have to learn to surrender into the unknown and knowing that there is something else greater that is guiding us.
Right. No, definitely. And I think that the connection to that higher power and that trust and faith is so important and so vital. And I think that is what we've been missing as sort of a collective story. Like, there isn't sort of a trust in the direction, a trust into going into the unknown. And, there's that sort of creates the fear and the complacency. And, I heard on your podcast, you were writing a book about the concept of freedom. And I think freedom, for me, I'm learning freedom it's not, it's good to have certain external freedoms in place and external boundaries, you could say. But I think freedom itself is very much internal, is what I'm discovering.
Absolutely.
Did you want to build on that and like what sort of freedom means to you?
Yeah. Viktor Frankl said in his book, The Man's Search for Meaning, and I don't know the exact quote, but the last of human freedoms is the ability to choose in any given circumstance. And, he obviously was in Auschwitz, the concentration camp, and he found an internal freedom through one of the most suffering places he could possibly find himself. And so it's a really beautiful thing. And I think freedom is a funny thing because it's such a high ideal for especially people in this country, right? Like our freedom, they're going to take our freedom away. But are you really free? I don't think people are. And, for like an example, if I'm traveling in a van, like I've heard this a lot, like, oh, I wish I could do what you did. I wish I could go travel in a van, or I wish I could go travel, period. Or I wish I could go do that. If you have ever thought, I wish I could do something, then are you actually free? Because to me, real freedom is knowing that you have the ability to create the life that you want to live. Like that's real freedom. And the thing that's getting in the way of that is the fear, is the limiting belief, is the programming of all the things that came before that told you why you can't. And that's the journey of inner freedom, is being able to look at those stories, understand where they come from. And that's what healing is. Healing isn't like, oh, like I had this really traumatic experience when I was younger and I need to work through it. It's like, no, healing is letting go of all the programming, all the stories of who you think you need to be to receive love, to receive worthiness, to receive validation. Like all the things that our culture and society tells us what success looks like, how to reach happiness. How come some of the wealthiest people are the most unhappy and they never seem to have enough? Because that is an unsatiable appetite for more, because they're trying to fill a void that is unfillable. And the only way to fill it is through self-love and a knowing that you are a aspect of creation and you have a spark of divinity within you. And until you go on that journey to freedom, you're not actually free, and you're going to be searching. I think everybody's searching for it. They don't know what they're searching for. And so they fill it with all this different stuff. And I think that's the journey that really, to happiness, to fulfillment, to all these things, is the inner journey of finding real freedom, which is being present, which is being love, which is enjoying and being grateful for the experience we've been given.
Right. Oh, 100%. And whenever that book comes out, I am going to be pre-ordering and getting a copy real quick, because
Thanks, brother.
that so resonates. And it's, and what's crazy is, like, it's a paradoxical journey, because the journey can be like that. Like, you can switch that on in an instant and find freedom in an instant through a conscious breath, through
Mhm.
a realization that you are deeper than you are infinite. Like, infinite doesn't have a beginning and end. It's just eternal. It's all there is, really. And
Mhm.
we really limit ourselves and our freedom by thinking we can attach such limiting beliefs and holding on to the stories, letting it finding it difficult to let go. And it's
Mm.
I think the first step is just that awareness of
Awareness,
freedom,
self-awareness is it.
self-awareness.
That's the journey we're all on. I mean, until you can really be self-aware, and it's not an easy journey. It takes a lot of courage to look at your own stories and your own triggers. And I mean, if you show
Mhm.
up in a situation and you get really angry at somebody, that person didn't make you angry. There's something that got triggered within you that made you angry. And so a self-aware person be like, wow, I got really angry right there. Like, that's something to look at. Why did I get angry? Oh, maybe it's because when I was younger, my dad, treated me like this in a certain situation, and that situation came up later. And those are the unconscious patterns that come up. And so self-awareness allows you to make the unconscious conscious. And when you can make the unconscious conscious and have an awareness of it, then you can continue to work through that. And I'm sorry to say that from my experience, what I've found is the onion is infinite, and that journey is infinite, because the unconscious is, the collective unconscious is infinite
Yeah.
potential. And there's these constant stories coming through. And I think to reach real freedom, it's funny, when I started writing that book, it's called Finding Freedom, and it chronicles my journey, and it's proving to be a very challenging book to write, but it's challenging me in a lot of good ways to grow. And um but when I first started writing it, like over a year ago, I came up with the title Finding Freedom, and my dog is named Freedom. So I thought that was very, amazing.
Yeah.
And over the year, like I've written a full manuscript. It definitely was not the book. And I've written like a bunch of different like things, and just trying to figure out how it all fits together. But since I started writing the book and came up with that title, my idea of freedom has continued to deepen. And like, I've questioned stories that I don't think a lot of people will ever even comprehend, because especially going and doing something like ayahuasca, it literally it can blast you into infinity. Like, there was one point when I was dancing in infinite potential and being able to see all the stories of even reality. And so, like, you can keep deconstructing the stories at infinitum, right? So even that is a path that will lead you away from the present moment. And so I learned, even through doing those psychedelic journeys, I had a wake up call that, okay, what am I really searching for here? Because that goes on forever as well. And so it's like coming back into the present moment and just continuing to question everything as it comes up in real time. Because, I mean, you can question anything and everything. And I think that's really the key, is to question.
Question. Yeah, I would agree. And it's funny, because when I was really little, my mom used to always think it was funny that I would ask why, how come, like, what is this, what is that, to almost everything as a kid. And
Mhm.
I think that questioning, it's actually a natural behavior. Like, it's
Yeah,
naturally,
curiosity, right?
yeah, it's
I
naturally
think
what we
I
do.
think every single person as a soul, like so this is my idea of the universe, right? So
Mhm.
we are the universe, right? So like God, let's say God existed and he was everything, and he created this experience of separation. And in order for us be to have an experience, we have to have an experience of separate selves. So although we are one and the same, but we are separate, so God can have an experience of himself. And God implanted this deep desire to know the universe, to uncover, to understand. And that journey is infinite. You can never actually fully understand, because then there would be an endpoint and the whole thing would collapse on itself. And
Mhm.
that's why there's so much paradox in the reality that we live in. There's everything is a paradox. And what a paradox does is it creates this journey that folds in on itself. So it's constantly folding in on itself. So you can never actually get to the end, but we all are planted with the seed of wanting to know what God is and know what this experience is. And that's funny because like all the mystical teachings, all the scientific teachings, everything is trying to understand what reality is from a different perspective, because we all have the desire to know God and know what this experience is, but we can never fully know it because then there wouldn't be an experience to be had. So it's just constant unfolding, and that's what infinity is. And that's why when you realize that, you can just sit in awe and be present and be like, wow, there is nowhere to be. There's nowhere to get to. It all is just right now.
Right. Definitely. The knowing is the answer itself. Just the sitting in the being. And, it's funny because I had Michio Kaku on my podcast. He's a very famous physicist, and he was talking about the God equation and searching for a unified field of everything. And I'm like, this sounds just like Eastern mysticism. And, it's everything I've noticed, everything is starting to really almost like become like a lot of the different fields like science and religion and mysticism, they're all starting to combine in a lot of ways. And they're coming to the same conclusions that there is something unifying us in the quantum field. There is this sort of underlying force, but it's not something I don't think that can be experienced. It's not something that we can
What has
measure.
to be experienced, right? Like
Right.
that's why we're here, is to have the experience
Right.
of it, not to figure it out. And that's why my podcast is called Quantum Coffee, right? Because I love like the physics of everything. And I'm very much like love reading about the science and the cosmos and how everything works. And it's just another map of the territory, but it is not the territory, and everything is trying to figure out the same thing. And it is fascinating that science is realizing that we're no longer in this Newtonian idea of physics and a physical reality. We have proven that everything is both a particle and a wave of possibility. They have actually experiments of this, the double split experiment, if you want to check this out, where they actually, depending on what the observer effect, right? Like the observer takes into account every scientific discovery. And so when you think about that, every theory that we've ever had, they haven't really taken in the fact that there needs to be an observer. And when you do that, it's kind of this like, whatever you observe and the observer wants to see, we are the creators of the reality, and we create that experience. And so when you really widen the lens on that, it makes you question, like, what are we actually capable of? What are the possibilities? If we are, I love the Rumi quote, we are not a drop in the ocean, but the entire ocean in a drop. We are literally the creators in creation creating. We are aspects of God. We are all one. What are we actually capable of? And there's, I love the book, Autobiography of a Yogi. I don't know if you've read it, about Yogananda. And there's some crazy stories in there of these really enlightened beings in India when he's growing up, and they like can like shapeshift and levitate and do all these like crazy things. And it's hard to believe, but when you start really like uncovering and doing these deeper journeys, and even the physics of it all, like we are all just energy, and like we are just the perceivers of the experience. What does that mean? What are we capable of? I think we're just barely scratching the surface. And, even with like technology, like, do we really know how like the internet works, or like iPhones, how we can FaceTime somebody, talk about quantum entanglement where, things travel, the fastest thing that can travel is the speed of light. Right. But what about quantum entanglement? How can I talk to somebody in real time in Australia? Because my wife's Australian. So we talk to her family on FaceTime, and it's instantly happening. Like there's no loss of like, it needs to travel at the speed of light. It's like instant.
Yeah.
Like, what is that? It's like we actually create physical manifestations of what our consciousness is capable of, but we don't ever actually look in awe of that. We just kind of keep going on the hamster wheel. Like, what else do I need to do? I need to make more money. I need to go get a bigger house, nice car. It's
right.
Like, crazy.
Right. Oh, I hadn't thought of it that it is a physical manifestation of what consciousness is capable of. That deeply resonates. And I think the biggest illusion of them all is that we are strictly physical beings. Like we are trapped into this sort of three-dimensional space, if you will, conscious wise, and we're able to interact with the quantum field. We're able to, at the wavelength level, able to manifest our reality and create things into our physical reality. So it's, I think you're right that we're barely scratching the surface of our actual potential. And, when when I'm looking to, you know, what is it that this sort of paradigm shift is going to be? I think it's going to be the tapping into that potential, the creating from that space, because we're already seeing it happen at the individual level. And we're already seeing more people uh, find that as a baseline reality, a place to live from, a space to create from.
Mm.
And the more people who do it, you're naturally going to have more people who follow suit, and eventually it just sort of shifts. And
Yep.
like you said, like the Berlin Wall fell. Well, next day Germany's unified. Like it's
Yeah.
so I feel like it's gonna be real quick. It's gonna
Yep.
happen, and
It's
it's
happening real quick right before our eyes. And I think one of the biggest things that's helping that is podcasting. And so
mm,
I'm really grateful for podcasts, because it's the one medium that they can't really have figured out how to censor yet. And,
yep.
just grateful for people that have these podcasts that are sharing, actual conversations of real truth and giving people an opportunity to really like learn. I think podcasting is part of this collective awakening for sure.
No, I would definitely agree, and it's I truly believe that. I think almost anybody in theory could have a podcast and get a message out there that is, that's authentic, that's truthful, that because I think everybody has a message, everybody has a way to contribute to this collective story, the collective paradigm shift, because we all have our own unique gifts, our own unique experiences that have shaped us into who we are. And I think when people really uh, embrace that, then they can make that difference. And that's why I think podcasting is such a beautiful medium, and why it's continuing to grow is because, I've never had an experience where I've listened to one person's podcast and then I hear another podcast later on from somebody else where it's like, oh, they're just copying Joe
Yeah.
Rogan or something.
Yeah.
Most of the podcasts I've listened to are all very authentic in their own ways, and
Mm.
it's beautiful to it. I'm sure you could attest to this too. It's beautiful to be engaged in this like type of platform and have this type of platform and
Yeah.
connect with connect with individuals, the community and people that I'm able to connect with podcasting. It's
Yeah.
by far the best part. Like it's such a beautiful
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, there's so many layers to it too. I mean, it's definitely a selfish thing, right? Because every time I have a conversation with someone, like I learn so much, right? And I'm able to
Yeah.
connect with people that I wouldn't normally be able to connect with. Like you said, you had a physicist on. Like I would love
Yeah.
to get his contact info so I could get him on my podcast, because I
Yeah.
love to have a conversation with him. And then it's just an more intimate experience, right? Like Instagram and all this other content creation stuff, it's just like kind of really superficial, and like it just goes in and out, the timeline. Like this is an actual conversation. It's a lot more intimate. There's a lot more depth to it. And I think you can just learn a lot from digesting this type of content. I'm really grateful that I decided to start one as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Was that when did you start? I know you actually have multiple shows. When was it that you actually decided to start yours up? Was that because I just discovered yours in the last month or so, last 2 months. So it was.
Yeah, it was during quarantine, and I do have another call coming up, but
Yeah.
I do want to share this. Yeah, it was during quarantine. I was traveling a bunch right before it happened, and obviously the world slowed down to an abrupt stop, and it was a really beautiful opportunity for me to do some self-reflection and real think about what I want to bring to the world. And so that's when I started Quantum Coffee, which I really enjoy, bringing on a bunch of people talking about these concepts we're talking about: spirituality, God, the unanswerable questions of the universe, and just constantly unfolding and discovering. And then I created Life Beyond the Game podcast, which I bring on former pro athletes to talk about their transition out of sports, and that's kind of tied to the community that I'm building with the Härt Collective. And I do have a third podcast with my wife called Love and Life, and that's a really cool reality show type audio experience that I think a lot of people would really enjoy, and people have enjoyed it. But the first season just went live like a month ago, and it's got a lot of like music and sound effects in it, and it's storytelling, and it's how we kind of met and how our relationship has evolved over our love story in quarantine, which is a really cool thing.
Beautiful. And I can attest to your work. You're doing a fantastic job with your podcasts. And where else, just to wrap up, where else would you want to send the listeners? And So the can you connect with the work that you're doing, outside of the podcast you just mentioned, and
Yeah. Thank you, man. The best place is probably Instagram at joe.hawley, Hawley. And if you go in the link that has everything I'm working on, my website to the Härt Collective, my personal website, and then all my podcasts as well. And then you can follow my newsletter. And I'd love to hear from your audience. If anybody has, any feedback or want to connect with me, definitely reach out.
Awesome. Will do. And I'll put all that in the episode notes so it's right on there. People can scroll on down and click it. But awesome, brother. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on. I mean, it was great to connect with you. I had a lot of fun in this conversation, and we'll definitely have to stay in touch and do it again in the near future.
Absolutely. I'd love that, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime, brother. That's going to wrap up the episode. I'll see you all next time.